How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Dysfunctional Commentary. A little while back, I did a video on the Best Buy exclusive 3D edition of Shazam, and I said in that video that while I felt that the film itself was very entertaining, that the 3D overall just kind of felt unnecessary. I just didn't think that it did anything to add to the experience in any significant way. But then that got me thinking, what about when the Blu-ray 3D format is used properly? What about when it's done right? So I thought that it might make for an interesting follow-up video to share some of my picks of movies that are worth owning a copy of to watch in 3D. Now, I personally feel that 3D is at its best when the movie is made with 3D in mind from the beginning. And when a movie is shot for 3D, it typically goes one of two ways. It's either done in a very gimmicky fashion that, unapologetically kind of points things at the screen, or it's done in a way to help make the overall experience more immersive. So the first movie that I'm going to talk about is Comin At Ya. And this movie definitely fits into the gimmicky 3D experience, but I do not mean that in a bad way at all. This is a movie that I just recently picked up off of a website called HamiltonBook.com. I actually did a video where I talked about a bunch of random movies that I was able to pick up off of that site for very cheap. I've been slowly making my way through all of the titles that I picked up, and I finally got around to Comin At Ya. Now, it's worth mentioning at this point that Comin At Ya is currently listed for $3 on the Hamilton Book website. Comin At Ya is partially the catalyst for my wanting to do this video in the first place. Watching this movie the other night made me remember just how fun watching a film in 3D can be if it's done properly. The movie itself is pretty basic. It's a spaghetti western from 1981. It's basically just a western with a revenge scenario, but I was not bored for 1 second while watching this film. There are parts of it that kind of remind me a little bit of a Tarantino movie. It's spaghetti westerns like this that are more than likely what Tarantino was watching when he drew inspiration for Django Unchained. There's also some visual effects in the movie that reminded me a little bit of a Robert Rodriguez movie. Now, as for the 3D, 3D is how this movie is meant to be seen. There are things being thrown at the screen, there's things being shot at the screen, there's explosions and fires in the foregrounds of the image. There's even a shot of a baby's butt that's appropriately framed for a 3D effect while the baby is being changed. That is the kind of movie that we're talking about. Basically, I just had a blast watching this movie, and it would be an easy recommendation from me regardless, but because the movie is currently going for $3, that's just a no-brainer. Yeah, most definitely this movie is worth picking up for $3 if you have a setup to watch it in 3D. The Blu-ray does have the 2D version as well, but like I said, this movie is meant to be watched in 3D. So if you don't have a 3D setup, I may not recommend it quite as highly, but either way, it is an entertaining spaghetti western, and it is only $3. So another film that I picked up off of HamiltonBook.com was Flying Swords of Dragon Gate, starring Jet Li. Back in 2000, director Ang Lee brought us Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It was a visually stunning martial arts film that influenced many other films that followed with its smooth, wire-assisted stunt work. Flying Swords of Dragon Gate is that type of movie. And I don't want to say that it's bad, but we have films like Crouching Tiger or 2004's Hero, so it's nothing that we really haven't seen before, except that it was shot for 3D. And there are some pretty impressive 3D effects in here, and I will say that I was entertained while watching it. I don't think I would go so far as to give it as high of a recommendation as Comin At Ya, but this is another movie that is currently listed for $3 on HamiltonBook.com. So at that price, it's hard for me to not at the very least give it a soft recommendation. Like I said, I was entertained while watching it. So yeah, I think it's worth picking up for $3. At this point, I'm going to throw in a bonus title, and that is Ape, or APE, I guess. This is a release from Kino Lorber that I just picked up during their recent sale, and it is another example of a film that was shot for 3D that definitely fits into that gimmicky 3D category. And Within the first 5 minutes of this movie, there is a scenario and series of line deliveries that had me bursting into laughter. It is that special kind of bad that is typically reserved for movies like Troll 2 or The Room or Samurai Cop. Not so bad that it's good, but rather so bad that it is amazing. And again, this happened right at the beginning of the movie, so I strapped myself in and prepared for a good time. Unfortunately, the movie was not able to maintain that level of just gloriously bad. So, sure, there were some scenes that had me laughing out loud, but it wasn't consistent. And had it stayed more consistent, I would be recommending this one much more highly. But ultimately, what you end up with is a poor man's King Kong. But if watched under the right circumstances, it can be entertaining, and it is meant to be watched in 3D. But really, I just wanted to mention this one as a bonus because I just recently picked it up. So, Ape. Moving on, I'm going to talk about an early 3D film, and that is Creature from the Black Lagoon from 1954. This was released on Blu-ray last year as part of Universal Monsters Legacy Collection. This includes the 3 original Creatures film, and the first 2 have the ability to be watched in 3D. The original Creature from the Black Lagoon is an iconic film from Universal's classic monsters that's great no matter how you watch it. But having the ability to watch this classic monster movie in 3D is like restoring part of its history. It's like taking that one step closer to seeing the film how it was originally seen when it was released theatrically. And I expected kind of to have this film fit into the gimmicky category, but it really doesn't come off all that gimmicky at all. And I would actually say that this edges more towards increased immersion. I was kind of surprised. The 3D effects, especially during the underwater footage, is really impressive. As for the sequel, Revenge of the Creature, there's some decent 3D effects, but overall just comes off as kind of inferior when compared to the original. Moving on from one underwater creature to another, we have Jaws 3 from 1983. Released theatrically as Jaws 3D. The original Jaws from 1975 is one of my all-time favorite films. You might actually notice a small Jaws poster hanging up on my wall in the background there. Jaws 2 was a decent sequel. It wasn't terrific or anything, but it wasn't really altogether bad either. It was decent. Jaws 3 is where things started to kind of fall apart. And then Jaws 4, The Revenge, that's where they just hit rock bottom. The Blu-ray release of Jaws 3 does include the 3D version of the film. Now, does watching Jaws 3 in 3D help to benefit it in any way? Yeah, kind of. I mean, it doesn't really make it a better movie or anything, but all of those shots and effects that just seem weird and out of place when you would watch the 2D version, all of a sudden they start to make a little bit of sense. This most certainly fits into the gimmicky category of 3D. And yeah, it even comes off as really cheesy at times, but that's kind of the point. I mean, the reality is that watching Jaws 3 in 3D did help to make it more entertaining for me. And it was shot for 3D and meant to be watched in 3D. And given the option, if I'm actually going to pop in Jaws 3, that's the way I'm going to watch it. Everything that I just said about Jaws 3 can now be applied to the next movie on the list, and that is Amityville 3D, also released in 1983. And just like Jaws 3, the Blu-ray also includes the 3D version of the film, and this Blu-ray comes as part of the Amityville trilogy, which was released by Scream Factory. It's gimmicky and really cheesy, but again, just like Jaws 3, that's kind of the point. This was meant to be watched in 3D, and given the option, once again, if I'm going to watch Amityville 3, I'll be watching it in 3D. There were several movies released in 3D during this period of the 80s. It was kind of a 3D revival of sorts, but it fairly quickly died off, and apart from a few exceptions, didn't really pop up again until the mid to late 2000s. This was the next 3D revival, and no other film really encapsulates this particular era of 3D more than Avatar. Now, if you were around and were lucky enough to go see this on an IMAX screen in 3D, the way it was really meant to be seen, then you know how impressive this movie was, at least on a visual level. James Cameron was able to create this visually striking world of Pandora and used the 3D technology to help immerse you in that world. Now, while watching the Blu-ray 3D may not be able to be as immersive as watching it on a true IMAX screen in 3D, there are still some impressive 3D effects on this disc. And if you're going to talk about Blu-ray 3D and collecting for 3D, then Avatar absolutely has to be included in the conversation. The next movie on the list is Tron Legacy. Now, this is an interesting one because Tron Legacy kind of reminds me a little bit of Wizard of Oz, and here's what I mean by that. In Wizard of Oz, all the scenes that take place in the real world are in monochrome. They're black and white. But once you enter the magical world of Oz, everything turns to color. Similarly, in Tron Legacy, all the scenes that take place in the real world are flat. They are not given a 3D effect. But once you enter the virtual world, that's when the 3D kicks in. So the 3D technology is used as a narrative technique in Tron Legacy, just like the colorization was used as a narrative technique in Wizard of Oz. It signifies that you're entering a different world. And the choice to use the 3D technology in this way was a conscious decision by the filmmakers, and it was the way that they intended the film to be seen. So for that reason, if you're going to include Tron Legacy as part of your collection, then the 3D version is definitely worth consideration. The next film that I am going to mention is Dredd. Now, first of all, let me say that Dredd is a criminally underrated action film. It's often compared to The Raid because of some similarities in the story, but just calling Dredd a Raid copy doesn't give Dredd nearly enough credit. On its own, it is a fast-paced, explosive action film. And besides, The Raid is one of the most brutal and intense action movies that I have ever seen. So if you are an action movie being compared to another action movie, you can certainly do worse than being compared to The Raid. Now, as for the 3D, Dredd is another example of a film that uses 3D as kind of a narrative device of sorts. The plot revolves around the trafficking of a narcotic known as slow-mo. The general idea is that if you take this drug, time seems to slow down. And throughout much of the film, the 3D effect is kind of subdued. But if somebody inhales slow-mo, all of a sudden the 3D effect goes into overdrive. And it helps to kind of, simulate the heightened senses or feeling that somebody who has taken this drug might be feeling. Just another example of a deliberate use of 3D by the filmmakers, and that definitely makes Dredd owning and watching in this way. There are plenty of films released in 3D that are not necessarily shot for 3D. Instead, they take the 2D footage and apply a post-conversion process. Now, the results of films that are post-converted for 3D are kind of hit and miss, but I do have some examples of some post-converted films that are actually pretty fun to watch in 3D. First is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and honestly, most of these movies have some pretty impressive post-conversion 3D. But if I were going to choose just one, I would probably have to pick the first Avengers film. Still one of my favorite of all of the MCU, and is absolute joy to watch, whether it be in 2D or 3D. The 3D effects are pretty well implemented in this movie, particularly during the last hour, and having the 3D version just gives me one other way to enjoy the film. Honorable mention for the Marvel Cinematic Universe goes to Doctor Strange. That's also a lot of fun to watch in 3D. Next up is Pacific Rim. I absolutely love this movie. It's still, in my opinion, the best Western kaiju film. This film is very colorful, and when you watch the movie in 3D, all of those colors and effects just kind of pop. But another example of a movie that is enjoyable no matter how you watch it, whether it be in 2D or 3D, but having another way to enjoy this terrific movie is not a bad thing. Next up, we have Ready Player One. This movie reminds me a little bit of Tron Legacy in how the 3D is used. It's another film that deals with a real world and a virtual world. And in the real world, the 3D isn't non-existent like it is in Tron Legacy, but it does seem a little more subtle. And then when you enter the virtual world, the 3D kind of goes up a few notches. This movie's a little bit divisive, I know, but you know what? I like this movie, and I do enjoy watching this one in 3D. Last, but certainly not least, we have Mad Max Fury Road. This is one of my all-time favorite action films. Once this movie gets going, it really doesn't stop and has very few pauses. And it is one final example of a film that is terrific no matter how you watch it, whether it be 2D, 3D, or even the black and chrome edition. That's George Miller's preferred version. But the 3D is pretty well implemented in this movie, and I do enjoy popping that version in from time to time. But that's pretty much going to wrap it up. And now I'm going to open up the conversation. Guys, what do you think of my picks? Can you think of some other movies that are worth owning a copy of to watch in 3D? Do you even like watching movies in 3D at all? Feel free to leave a comment. I would be very interested in hearing what you have to say on this topic. Guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you later.